During the middle of World War II, in a cramped living room in England, a group of sailors sat quietly around a woman known only as a medium. The lights were dim, the air heavy, and everyone in the room expected nothing more than a few comforting words from the dead. But that night, the medium, Helen Duncan, said something that should have been impossible. She lowered her head, fell into a trance, and whispered, "A sailor is here. He says the Barham has gone down." The men froze. HMS Barham wasn't just any ship. It was a battleship, a classified military asset. And at that moment, its sinking was one of Britain's most tightly guarded wartime secrets. No one in the room was supposed to know. No one in the entire country was supposed to know. Yet somehow, Helen knew. Within weeks, she would be arrested. Within months, she would become the last woman in British history to be jailed under the Witchcraft Act. And the question that haunted everyone, from grieving families to MI5, was simple. How did she know something only the military was aware of? This is the story the government tried to bury. Helen Duncan didn't begin her life as a mystery, or a threat, or a headline. She began as a girl in a small Scottish town, born in 1897, when superstition still lived quietly in the corners of everyday life. Her family was poor. Her father worked long hours. Her mother was strict, religious, and terrified of anything that smelled like the supernatural. And Helen was different from the start. People would later say she was loud, stubborn, emotional, the kind of child who filled a room without trying. But the thing everyone remembered most was that she spoke with certainty about things she couldn't possibly know. As a young child, she would tell neighbors when a relative was sick before anyone had received a letter. She would point at an empty chair and say, "He's sitting there." She would wake up crying from dreams that later came true in small, unsettling ways. Her mother tried to discipline it out of her. The local church warned her to stop talking about visions. But the more people reacted, the more Helen's instinct sharpened. By her teens, she had a reputation. Not a good reputation, a strange one. Some were afraid of her. Some whispered about her behind her back. Some avoided walking past her house at night. She didn't grow up dreaming of seances or spirits or any kind of occult life. She dreamed of ordinary things: a job, a husband, a safe home, a predictable future. But the strangeness followed her. When she worked at the textile mill, coworkers noticed she would stop suddenly, look into the distance, and mutter, "Something bad is coming." Then a worker would get injured, or a machine would break, or news would arrive that someone had died. She didn't seek attention. If anything, she tried to hide who she was. But in small towns, secrets don't stay small. Helen never received any formal training in anything supernatural. Her education was life, hard, exhausting, ordinary life, and the strange moments that kept slipping into it. When she left school, she took the only work she could find: long, punishing shifts in local mills and factories. These places were loud, cramped, and dangerous, but they taught her discipline, they taught her endurance, and they taught her how to read people, their moods, their fears, their intentions. Coworkers would say she had an unusual ability to sense when something was wrong. A woman would arrive at work silent, looking tired, and Helen would say quietly, "It's your brother, isn't it?" And the woman would stare at her in shock, because no one else knew her brother was ill. Another time, a supervisor asked why Helen kept glancing toward the far end of the mill. She replied, "Something's going to fall." Minutes later, a heavy beam slipped from its bracket and crashed to the floor. No one was hurt, but everyone remembered she said it. Her education wasn't academic. It was emotional. She learned how easily people feared the unknown, how quickly rumors spread, how deeply humans craved reassurance during uncertain times. Her early adulthood also taught her something else. The world was full of suffering, wars, accidents, diseases, loss after loss in every family she met. People came to her not because she was strange, but because she seemed to understand their pain before they even spoke. Helen married Henry Duncan, a quiet, injured war veteran with a soft voice and gentle nature. Their marriage wasn't glamorous. It was built on survival. They had children, and money was always tight. Every penny mattered. Every meal was planned. Every bill was a worry. But Henry noticed something important. People came to their door asking Helen for comfort, not gossip, not predictions, but comfort. Widows, mothers, young men about to leave for war, old men who'd lost sons. Henry would hear the same sentence over and over again from visitors. She helped me sleep again, not with magic, just with words. Strange words, yes, but words they felt they needed. Helen slowly realized she had two paths in front of her. One path was the life she was raised for, factory shifts, quiet existence, no attention. The other was the life her gift pushed her toward, a role she didn't choose, but one she felt responsible for. And the moment that changed everything, the moment that shaped the next decade of her life, came unexpectedly, through an invitation she didn't see coming. A local spiritualist church asked her to demonstrate her abilities, not in secret, not behind closed doors, publicly. And whether she knew it or not, accepting that invitation was the first step toward becoming one of the most controversial figures in British history. The spiritualist church that invited her was small, more like a community hall than a place of worship. Wooden chairs, tea-stained tablecloths, the smell of damp coats and cheap perfume. People gathered there not for spectacle, but for comfort. Most had lost children, husbands, brothers. The scars of the First World War were still fresh. Helen arrived nervous, clutching her handbag tightly, wearing her best dress, the only one without patch stitching. She didn't see herself as a medium. She saw herself as someone trying not to disappoint a room full of grieving strangers. But the moment she sat down and closed her eyes, it was as if she had stepped into the life she'd been avoiding for years. She spoke slowly at first, hesitant, unsure of her own voice. Then suddenly, names, details, and descriptions began flowing out of her. A mother in the front row started crying before Helen finished her sentence. A man in the back gasped when she described a scar his brother had on his arm. Someone whispered, "How could she possibly know that?" Word spread within weeks. Not excitement, not curiosity, need. The people who came weren't thrill seekers. They were broken, desperate, searching for closure. Helen was invited to more circles, then to private homes, then to seances with 10, 20, even 40 people crammed into a living room. She didn't prepare speeches. She didn't rehearse. She didn't study occult literature or learn ritual chants. She simply sat down, closed her eyes, and let whatever came, come. It wasn't long before spiritualist organizations took notice and began documenting her work. Investigators attended. Reporters wrote short columns. Some tried to debunk her and left frustrated. Some sat through seances expecting to laugh and left shaken. One of the early notes from an investigator read, "Either she has access to every personal detail of everyone in this room, or something is happening here that we don't understand." By the late 1930s, Helen wasn't just another medium. She was one of the most talked about spiritual figures in Britain. But with recognition came resistance. Church leaders condemned her. Skeptics stalked her meetings. Police began to appear quietly, not to arrest, yet, but to observe. Helen's entry into the occult wasn't a dramatic ritual or a secret initiation. It was simply the moment she stepped into a community that believed her gift was real and demanded more of it. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a purpose, but she couldn't see the danger yet. She didn't know that the deeper she went, the closer she moved toward the one moment that would shatter everything. The night she revealed a military secret. And when that happened, the government would treat her not like a medium, not like a fraud, not like a performer, but like a threat. By the early 1940s, Helen Duncan was living two completely different lives. So different that if you saw her in the daytime, you'd never believe what she became at night. By day, she was a mother of 6, worn down by chores, bills, and endless responsibility. Henry Duncan, her husband, did his best, an injured war veteran with a calm, almost defeated softness to him. He supported Helen, but the house was a battlefield of its own. There were days when Helen was so exhausted she could barely lift her head, but the moment evening came, her life transformed. By night, she became the most sought-after medium in the UK. People traveled miles, sometimes walking in the cold darkness, just to sit with her for a few minutes. In quiet living rooms across Britain, they would push aside furniture, dim the lights, and sit in complete silence as Helen prepared herself. She'd sit in a chair, straighten her dress, and, to Henry, "If anything happens, don't let them panic." He always nodded, even though he wasn't sure what she meant by anything. Then Helen would close her eyes, take a deep breath, and fall into a trance. To the people watching, she became something else entirely. Her voice changed, sometimes softer, sometimes deeper. She spoke names, described clothing, repeated private jokes or phrases that only the deceased person would know. Mothers cried, widows clutched their coats, and "That's him. That's really him." Some seances lasted 5 minutes. Some lasted 3 hours. As her popularity grew, so did suspicion. Neighbors complained about crowds. Police attended undercover, pretending to be grieving relatives. Government officials began taking notes. And in wartime Britain, when fear and secrecy governed every decision, the government didn't like problems. Still, Helen continued, but every seance brought her closer to the moment that would destroy her. And it would happen the night she revealed a military secret so sensitive the British government reacted as if she were a spy. Helen sat in the circle, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Several sailors were present, men who'd come hoping to hear from fallen friends. A few minutes into the trance, her voice changed. Her breathing became shallow. She whispered, "He is here. A young sailor. He is cold." The men leaned forward. Helen said, "He served on the Barham." The men exchanged confused looks. Helen's voice trembled. "He says the ship is gone." One of the sailors immediately stood up. "That's impossible," he snapped. "No one knows where Barham is right now." He wasn't wrong. HMS Barham had been sunk by a German U-boat, but the British government kept the disaster completely classified. They didn't want Germany to know they'd succeeded. Only a handful of people in the country knew it had happened. Yet somehow, Helen spoke it, accurate, specific, confident. The sailors in the room froze. Some believed instantly, some panicked. Some thought Helen was working with the enemy. But when that seance ended, when the whispers spread, when the rumors reached the wrong ears, that's when the government moved. Because to MI5, it didn't matter whether Helen got the information from a ghost or from a German agent. All that mattered was that she had it. And now they wanted to know how. Helen's rise was over. Her confrontation with the British state had begun. After the HMS Barham seance, everything in Helen Duncan's life tightened like a noose. Her supporters didn't see it at first. To them, she was still the warm, heavy-shouldered woman who sat in a living room and brought comfort to grieving families. But behind the scenes, something had shifted. The British government was watching her now, closely, quietly, and with growing suspicion. They didn't send her warnings. They didn't ask her questions. They didn't interview her politely. They simply began building a case around her, piece by piece. Police officers attended her seances pretending to be widowers or sailors. They sat in the dark, not to hear from the dead, but to write down everything Helen said. Meanwhile, MI5 collected reports about her unusual accuracy. Her name began appearing in internal memos. She was labeled a potential security risk, even though she'd never left Scotland and barely understood military ranks. Then came the raid. It happened on a night like any other. Helen was mid-seance, her voice slipping in and out of trance, when a sudden crash shattered the silence. The door burst open. Policemen flooded the room. Chairs toppled. Women screamed. A man tried to shield Helen as torches flashed in her face. One officer shouted, "Enough of this! You're coming with us!" She was dragged from the chair, still half in a trance, her breathing unsteady. The group who had come for comfort stood frozen, unsure whether they were watching the arrest of a fraud or the persecution of a woman who genuinely helped people. At the station, officers didn't charge her with fraud. They didn't accuse her of deception. They charged her under the 1735 Witchcraft Act, a law written in a world of witches, spells, and superstitions. A law older than electricity, older than trains, older than photography, now used against a woman in 1944, in the middle of a global war. Helen stared at the officers in disbelief. She'd expected a warning, maybe a fine, maybe questioning. But witchcraft? She asked one constable quietly, "Do you really believe I'm a witch?" He didn't answer. He just looked away. Days later, her trial began, and that was when the country turned her life into a spectacle. The courtroom overflowed. Journalists, skeptics, spiritualists, police, military officials, and curious citizens all trying to get a glimpse of the woman newspapers were now calling Britain's last witch, the danger in the darkened room, the medium who knew too much. Inside the courtroom, Helen sat trembling, clutching a handkerchief. Her husband Henry sat beside her, silent, helpless. Prosecutors didn't care whether she truly summoned spirits. They didn't care whether she believed what she did. They cared that during wartime, she said things she shouldn't have known. For Helen, the trial wasn't just humiliating, it was surreal. At one point, she whispered to Henry, "I only tried to help people. Why are they doing this?" Henry, usually soft-spoken, squeezed her hand and replied, "Because they're afraid, Helen. They're afraid of what you know." Witnesses testified. Police officers described their undercover visits. Prosecutors waved sheets of paper listing her statements about the Barham. The judge wasn't sympathetic. He called her dangerous. He called her irresponsible. He said she was a menace to wartime security. And as the trial dragged on, it became clear they didn't just want to stop her, they wanted to make an example of her. And now, Helen was about to pay the price. As the trial moved forward, something inside Helen Duncan began to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a foundation shifting under pressure. Every day of the trial, she grew weaker. Her hands trembled, her breath shortened. She wrote in her diary, pages filled with questions, fear, and one repeating thought: they want to silence me. She believed it deeply, not because she thought she had supernatural power, but because she knew the Barham revelation had changed everything. She told Henry one night, her voice shaking, "If they let me go, they'll still watch me. And if I speak again, they will come for me again." Henry tried to reassure her, but even he couldn't hide the truth. He saw the way the officials looked at her. One evening, during the final weeks of the trial, Helen received a visit from a small group of spiritualists. They weren't wealthy or powerful or influential. They were ordinary people. Widows, factory workers, old men with shaking hands, who believed she had helped them through the darkest moments of their lives. One of them, an elderly woman with a worn coat and swollen eyes, told her, "You gave me back my son's voice. No judge can take that from you." Helen cried for the first time since the trial began. In one of the last entries in her notebook before sentencing, she wrote, "If they stop me from speaking, they will stop countless mothers from healing." On the final day of the trial, the courtroom felt heavier than it had on any previous morning. Helen sat beside her husband, hands clasped tightly. The judge entered, papers in hand. His expression was cold, resolved. He saw a problem that needed to be eliminated. He read the sentence: 9 months imprisonment. Under the Witchcraft Act of 1735, the courtroom gasped. Henry placed his hand on hers, his voice barely audible. "It's over, Helen. Let's just get through this." Prison broke her, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She was not a young woman anymore. Her health had already been fragile, her body already tired from years of seances, childbirth, and stress. Behind bars, her weight dropped, her breathing worsened, and her energy faded. Guards noted she coughed constantly. Visitors said she walked like someone twice her age. When Helen was finally released, Henry tried to help her recover. Friends brought food. Supporters visited to tell her she was still loved, still needed. Still, against Henry's pleas, she returned to giving small seances. In 1956, 12 years after her imprisonment, police raided another of her seances. This time, she wasn't dragged away or charged, but the shock was enough. Helen collapsed days later. Her health rapidly deteriorated. She died shortly after. She was 59. And here is the haunting part. The Witchcraft Act, the very law that imprisoned her, was abolished shortly after her death, as if the country suddenly realized how absurd, how cruel, how outdated the entire trial had been. Researchers still debate how she knew about HMS Barham. Historians still discuss MI5's interest in spiritualists during the war. And families who attended her seances still insist she brought them genuine peace. The government never gave an explanation, not about the Barham, not about the surveillance, not about why they used a 200-year-old law to silence her. Helen Duncan's story ends with a question that has never been answered. Was she a fraud? Or was she a woman the government couldn't allow to speak?